Winter's coming around. I can see people got their coats on in here. For a big guy, it feels just great, though. Thanksgiving's coming up. I love Thanksgiving. I hope I don't sound... I don't know. It's not that I don't like Christmas, but I like at Thanksgiving, you just hang out with family. You don't have to worry about getting presents and that type of stuff, and you just really spend great time with your family. I'm not saying that Christmas is bad, just love Thanksgiving. And looking forward to being with my family. I hope you are too, and your friends. I've been doing a sermon series the last few weeks called The Omniness of God. We talked about God being all-powerful, and the Word was omnipotent. We talked about Him being all-knowing, the Word was omniscient. Today we're going to talk about Him being ever-present, and that word is omnipresence. And in that word, we have to be careful with our theology because this is the idea that God is everywhere. And sometimes we can get mixed in with some other religions, and the idea of God being everywhere, and that God is in the trees, or God is in the birds and the animals, and God is in the water, and God is in the sun. And we have to see that God is a being in person. It's not that He isn't everywhere. It's just that not everything is to be worshipped. We can get into a lot of trouble when we start worshiping the created things rather than the Creator. But this idea that God is everywhere is the best way, again, that our finite minds can try to describe an infinite God. It's amazing how God can talk to you, He can talk to me, He can talk to anybody on this whole planet all at the same time. It's because He's omnipresent. He is everywhere. And another thing that we can get into trouble sometimes is that we think that we have to somehow, sometimes in worship or in other ways, do things in order to get God to show up more. And God is not like Aladdin who tried to get the genie out of the bottle, out of the lamp. It's not this, okay, if I pray more, if I worship more, if I do better things, God's going to show up. Now, here's how it works, okay? Just imagine as if we turn the lights out in this room, and then it would be totally dark, and then we begin to have a dimmer, and it turns the lights on more and more and more. Well, we always know that the lamps are here to turn the lights on. It's always been here. It's just that the dimmer switch has anything to do with God. The dimmer switch has to do with us, because the more that we get in the way, the less we see of God. But the more that we get rid of us, the more we see of God, and that God is all around and He has always been here. One prayer, a prayer that I pray every single Sunday morning before I get into the pulpit, I pray a simple prayer that God, may I decrease so that You increase. Let people see less of me and more of You. I would hope that through the words and through the scriptures we put up, and even through my own personality, that won't block the person of who God is. Because then it'll be about me. As I was joking earlier about, hey, let's say thanks today because you get to see me today. Unfortunately, me gets in the way a whole lot of times. And I was just joking with that. But joking aside, that's what happens. And when there's more of us in the room, that's when we see either none of God or less of God. But the more that we step out of the way, the more that, like in the song we sang, we become undone, we begin to see more of God, and we can see that His presence is everywhere. And so you have this amazing God who's all-powerful, who can do anything that He wants to do. This God who is all-knowing. He knows every single situation. He knows how to work through everything. And all these three things work together. They're a little bit distinguished, but they do work together. But they also, have these differences. And this idea of Him being omnipresent means that even though God is all-powerful and He's all-knowing, it doesn't mean that He's distant. That same all-powerful, all-knowing God is right here with you and I. He's right here. There's no distance. Some people feel like, I've heard somebody say that they don't feel like when they pray that their prayers get past the roof. Well, if you really understand who God is, your prayers don't have to go past the roof. God lives inside you. He's right here with you. And really what it's a matter of is how much are we getting in the way? How much are we blocking to where we can't see Him as well? So I hope through today's sermon you'll be encouraged to keep pressing on, and that you'll be reminded that God is with you wherever you go. And so we're going to look through a story out of Exodus chapter 33, a story of Moses. And let's go ahead and go to it. Exodus chapter 33, starting with the 7th verse, reads like this. Now Moses used to take a tent and pitch it outside the camp some distance away, calling it the tent of meeting. And anyone inquiring of the Lord would go to the tent of meeting outside the camp. And whenever Moses went out to the tent, all the people rose and stood at the entrances of their tents, watching Moses until he entered the tent. And as Moses went into the tent, the pillar of the cloud would come down and stay at the entrance while the Lord spoke with Moses. And whenever the people saw the pillar of cloud standing at the entrance to the tent, they all stood and worshipped, each at the entrance of their tent. The Lord would speak to Moses face to face as one speaks to a friend. And then Moses would return to the camp, but his young aide Joshua, son of Nun, did not leave the tent. Let's just stay right there in the scripture verse. I'm going to give a little bit of a background. I don't know if you're familiar with the story of Moses or in the book of Exodus. The whole idea of the book of Exodus is that the Israelites are leaving Egypt and they're going to the Promised Land. And they wander in the wilderness for many reasons, the mistakes they made, whatever. They wander in the wilderness for 40 years. Now, during that wandering, God provides a fire by night and a cloud by day. And basically what this was an old-time version of GPS. You knew where to go because there was this cloud that you could see during the daytime. You could follow it. And then, of course, you can't see a cloud very well at night, so there was a fire that was blazing that they could follow, and it took them wherever they were supposed to go. Now, you're talking about over 1 million people traveling around in the wilderness. And they were nomads in the sense to where they didn't have any permanent buildings, so they had tents. They lived in tents, and they camped a lot. And so I'm sure a lot of you like to camp, so you know that feeling how you get up and move on to the next thing real fast. But this was their whole life. It just wasn't a fun weekend. And they would set up a big camp where everybody would sleep or whatever. But Moses did an amazing thing. He would take one tent and go outside the camp, set it up, and that could be a place where anybody could come and talk to God. Now, there was something different, though, with Moses. Because when Moses would go into the tent, that same cloud that they followed by day would come and rest over the entrance of the tent. And the whole nation of Israel would take notice of this. And when they saw that special moment happening to where they knew that Moses and God were getting real close, they would all stand outside of their tent at their entrance and worship God in respect to how God was speaking to Moses, because they know that in order to follow God, they were going to follow Moses, and that's just how it was working. And what I love about the scripture, and this does go totally with my sermon, but I got to talk about it today. Got to talk about it. Is that very end of it where we hear the name Joshua, and it says, then Moses would return to the camp, but his young aide Joshua, son of Nun, did not leave the tent. And I've got to believe this. Now, if you know the story of Moses, he makes a couple mistakes and is not able to go into the Promised Land. There's another leader that has to take them, and that leader ends up being Joshua. He ends up getting the mantle of leadership to take the Israelites to the Promised Land. Now, you might remember the story. There's a story about where he goes and he fights against Jericho, this big walled city. And you might have heard the song or heard the story of how the walls came crumbling down, right? Tumbling down. Now, here's what I would like to suggest. That the leadership of Joshua did not begin when the mantle was passed to him from Moses to himself. But I believe the leadership of Joshua started right here, to where when he saw Moses having a face-to-face talk with God, that even when Moses left that tent, Joshua wanted to stick around and be in that essence and stay in that place that was so beautiful. Because God was present. And that God was talking to Moses and God was leading Moses. And so that Joshua could just get a few of the crumbs of that leftovers of whatever God and Moses were talking about. And so here's the first point I want to make, and it's this. that our face-to-face talks with God will inspire the next generation. If God is omnipresent, if God is real, if God is omnipresent, if God is real, that I believe that just as he's talked to you, he can talk to another generation. And I want you to know that I am not frightened, and I don't have fear, and I'm not upset by seeing some of the stuff that's going on with our young generation. I am concerned, though. I will say that word. I am concerned. And here's what I'm concerned about. I believe that we are raising a generation that defines everything, that defines our worldview, our perception of God, or even not a perception of God, by our experience and how we feel. And this becomes really dangerous because when all I do is try to describe this world by how I feel, or I wrap myself all into how I feel, guess what? That is a place to where you are blocking God, because God's ways are not our ways. He doesn't think like we think. And it's our job to become more like him. It's not his job to become more like us. And what we have to realize is that we have a generation that's coming up that if I get upset, if something doesn't go my way, then I'm just going to go and have a big pity party about it. And that's why I believe Christianity is tough for this generation to understand. And I understand a lot of hardcore conservative churches are losing out on a young generation because we are not preaching, and I'll say this all boldness, we are not preaching a diluted gospel. There's a diluted gospel going out there that talks about, it's about how I feel. And feelings and emotions are dangerous because they do this all the time. But God stays steady and God stays consistent. And it's attracted to a young generation because a young generation wants to always describe how they feel. And again, I'm not knocking a young generation. Here's what I believe. Even if we fall away, God always has a remnant. So God is the sovereign. God is in control. God's got it together. But I just think that we haven't been the best example to our generation. I'm not accusing you as an individual. I'm accusing a generation. Does that make sense? I'm marking that in that sense. Let me give you an example. When I was a teenager, my parents split up when I was 15. And I can remember being on that airplane as it was leaving the runway. I can remember, because I went to church my whole life, I can remember saying, God, you must not be real. How could you be real and this happened to my family? I remember saying that in my head to God. And then when we landed in Illinois, and we lived in Springfield, Illinois, my mom was now a single mother, and we shared a one-bedroom apartment. My mom got a couch, and me and my brother slept in a hideaway couch in a kitchen. And my mom, of course, her being the female, she got the room. And I would wake up every day with my brother, hit him once. I didn't. And we would put the bed away, get up, and it was our turn to take showers. And as me and my brother would go through her room to go to the shower, there would be my mom every single morning reading her Bible and praying. Like clockwork. My mom never had to say, Tim, you got to go to church. My mom never said, Tim, you need to quit listening to that music. My mom said, Tim, you need to quit going to those movies. Tim, you need to quit doing this and you quit doing that. You know what my mom did? Every day, got up and prayed and read her Bible. My mom was having a face-to-face talk with God every day. And so I wonder if... So I don't want to blame this young generation that's falling away. I wonder if it's our fault. I'm wondering if a young generation is benefiting from a face-to-face talk with Jesus. Or maybe that's the fact. Maybe they're not benefiting from that because we're not doing it. See, I'm not talking about parading and showing how much you read the Bible or how much you go to church or how much you pray. But I got to believe that if the essence of Jesus is over you, people are going to notice it. And if your own children in your own house don't see a difference in you, why would they think that God can make a difference in this world? And we got kids who go to church because either they're forced to, or because it's out of duty, or because that's just what we've always done. And then they go to a college full of liberal thinkers who teach them something totally different. And then we wonder why they leave. But I'll say this. It seems like some kids graduate God when they graduate high school. And it's sad. And I don't blame them. Before I try to be really careful about talking about parenting, because I've never really been a parent, but I've been a parent now. And you know what? There's a big difference. There's a big difference between loving your child and letting them have control of the house. You can still love your child and them not be in control. I don't see how we could see this as love, because love and compassion doesn't mean that I just let the child do whatever they want to do and let them stay out as late as they want, or not do their homework, or every time they throw a tantrum they get their way. I know I'm blanketing and generalizing a whole thing, but I just got to believe this is where I believe where our generation, this generation is suffering, because we haven't communed with God like we should have. As I don't know if we want to call ourselves ex-Jenners, if we call ourselves baby boomers, whatever it is, because now we call them millennials, right? That's the new word for the next people. And I make jokes about millennials sometimes, and my wife gets angry at me, and I probably shouldn't do it as much as I should. But there's definitely, you can tell there's definitely a lost generation that's coming up. And it's not because they are lost just because they've made decisions. I don't know if they've had it modeled in front of them. I just got to believe that. And I could be wrong. I mean, I know it's just my opinion or whatever. But, man, what if some of these kids had a Moses in front of them and they wanted to stay around and be more like that person because they had a great relationship with God? And I guess for me it makes sense because it worked in my life. My mom made it seem like it was important to pray. My mom made it seem like it was important to me to dive into the Word and try to understand it better and have a deep, intimate relationship with God. Because you know what? Who knows who's standing at the feet of a mentor or whatever? Who knows if the next child that you are mentoring, that you are parenting, could be the next person who brings down the walls of Jericho? Isn't that an awesome thing to think that your child could be that person because you've communed with God, because they understand what it means to have this deep relationship with Him? What a beautiful thing. I think of our teenagers that are at youth convention this weekend. And I think about all the positive things that I hear about what they're having right now from some of the leaders. And I wanted to be there with them. And the reason why I wanted to be there with them is because a lot of times I got to talk with God at one of those conventions. Our youth convention is a thing that our churches do in the state of Illinois. They meet in Peoria, and they have a whole week packed of worshiping God and getting to know other people and just really being able to connect. And I really wanted to go. Couldn't do it this year, but I get excited because we have 7 kids over there, and I think we're praying this morning. God, I hope all seven of them can break down some walls. Wouldn't that be awesome? Just believing that. Believing that God can make a difference through them. I've always said it, and as a youth pastor, I always said that if we say that the youth are our church tomorrow, it's too late. It's too late. Youth are the church of today. And there was Joshua at the feet of Moses, being inspired to be a leader. Who are we inspiring? Not just with words or deeds, but inspiring with a close-knit relationship with God. Who are we inspiring? And if we're not inspiring anybody, and if having that close, tight relationship with God is not in our life, then maybe that's where we need to start. Because Moses was able to go to a tent, and God, the very presence of God, would hover right over it. Oh man, I tell you what, I was mad and angry as a teenager, but I looked forward to walking by my mom praying, walking by my mom reading the Bible, because God's presence was there. God's presence was in that moment. And even though I was rejecting it, and even though I was questioning it, there was something inside of me that still needed it. So I don't care who says they're an atheist. I don't care who says they're an agnostic. I'm telling you right now, I believe past their mind, because I believe God created them to be connected with Him. And that there'll be something inside of us as we talk with God, as we have a face-to-face with God, that there's something inside of us that will draw that part of the human being to Him. So let's go on into the story. And we'll talk more about the presence of God. And Moses said to the Lord, "You have been telling me, lead these people, but you have not let me know whom you will send with me. And you have said, I know you by name, and I have found favor with me. But if you are pleased with me, teach me your ways, and I may know you and continue to find favor with you. Remember that this nation is your people." And the Lord replied, "My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest." So here's the next line if you want to fill the blank out. It's the presence of God will give us rest as we partake on the journey. Ding, 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 ding. I got to tell you all something. God has asked you to come on a journey with Him, and guess what? He's not going to give you all the details. Do you hear that? Now my wife, when we go on a journey, when we go on vacation, she's awesome. She has everything lined out for me, so that all I got to do is show up, right? But being on a journey with God is not a vacation. Being on a journey with God is going to take some sacrifice, and it's going to take some sweat, and it's going to take some tears. But He guarantees you this, that if you do go on the journey with Him, He will give you rest. He will give you rest. And I know I preached about this a few months ago, about taking a Sabbath and having rest. But I'm wondering sometimes if you still have to be reminded to take a rest, because I don't have to remind myself that sometimes. You got to take a break. You got to find rest in Him. And I think we live a life where we say, God, it'd be so much easier if you tell me how all this is going to go about. But then guess what? If He tells you how all it goes about, then you can't really live a life by faith. And God is pleased by faith. Hebrews says that it's impossible to please God without faith. So we know that faith is a key ingredient into this relationship that we have with God, and that the presence of God will give us rest when we partake on the journey. That wherever we go, He's going to give us rest. That He's going to give us the things that we need as we go along. You notice Moses, he kept on telling God, well, God, remember, I got to lead these people. God, I got all these questions. God, I don't have any answers, but I still got to lead these people. And I love how God answers Moses. He doesn't tell Moses, hey, Moses, quit belly aching. He doesn't tell Moses, hey, quit whining. You know what He tells Moses? He says, don't worry about it. I'll give you rest. Don't worry about it. It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. He doesn't chastise Moses. He doesn't get angry at Moses. He doesn't set Moses aside and say that you're not good enough for the journey. And I want you to know, if you question God, and if you're having a hard time with the journey that you're having with God right now, or you're questioning whether even to get on a journey, I want you to know that God will accept all your questions and it won't sever the relationship. God will still be your God. And He will remind you that He will give you rest. He will give you rest. You got to be willing to take that rest. There's no such thing as a super Christian out there. No such thing. You need rest. You need to take a break. And you know what you may need to do? You may need to say no to some things. It's okay to say no. Don't forget that. You might even have to say some no to some things that are very worthwhile. They may not even be in their own negative things. But if it keeps you from breaking bread and having a face-to-face talk with God and having rest in Him, then that becomes an idol. Even ministry can become an idol. It's crazy, isn't it? That kind of stuff can get in the way. And you know what? I have to say that it's sad to see that there's people who love God, but they're burnt out. Oh my gosh, they're burnt out. They're burnt out with church. They're burnt out with work. They're burnt out with their family and everything else. And I tell you what, I know again, this is a generalization, but it works in a lot of places. It's because you're not taking time to rest with God. Now, I'm a pastor, okay? And it's a lot easier for me to find time to open up the Bible when I'm at work, probably more than you, because guess what? That's my job. I understand that. But you know what's crazy, though? Do you know how many times that I'm in a deep moment with God? I'm talking about we're having that moment where it feels like a pillar of a cloud is over my head, and it's just intense and it's beautiful, and then the phone rings. Or someone knocks on the door. Now, don't be afraid to knock on my door or give me a call. That's not what it is. I'm just saying that if in that moment I can be distracted, I'm just saying I think I understand how many distractions you have and how important it is for you to take a time and say, you know what, me and God are going to have a face-to-face. Me and God are going to have this face because we're on this journey and I need some rest. I believe the face-to-face with God is going to be your journey, or going to be your rest. And so I don't care if it happens on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and hopefully it's not just Sunday that you're partaking in this time with God. Because we need Him every day. But the presence of God is what we need when we go on this journey. Because let's look later on into the story. When Moses said to him, if your presence does not go with us, do not send us up from here. How will anyone know that you are pleased with me and with your people unless you go with us? What else will distinguish me and your people from all the other people on the face of the earth? And the Lord said to Moses, I will do the very thing you have asked, because I am pleased with you, and I know you by name. Then Moses said, now show me your glory. Now do you see we sang a song earlier called Show Me Your Glory? The writer of the song from Third Day definitely was in this text when he was writing the lyrics for the song. See, this is an amazing thing, is that Moses wanted God to show His glory. He had all these doubts. He had all these insecurities. And he wanted God's glory to be shown. And he says, what's going to distinguish us? And let's look at this next line here. That the presence of God will distinguish us from the rest of the world. Please understand, Christians, we got to be careful when we say this. This can't be in a temperance of arrogance. It can't be in a mode of we got it all right and they got it all wrong. Because I believe that's when God exits. But here's what we have to believe, though. That there's got to be something different about us. And Moses asked God, what's going to distinguish us from everybody else? From every other group? What's going to distinguish us from the Rotary Club? What's going to distinguish us from every other charity and good, whatever? What's going to distinguish us is the very fact that God's presence is with us. That's what's going to distinguish us. And what distinguishes us is that God then becomes the center of it rather than ourselves. Because then God's glory is shown. Because here's what happens. If your glory is shown, if my glory is shown, if it all becomes about me, that's when it all falls apart. Because we're imperfect human beings. But God is perfect. He has never sinned. He has never done anything wrong. He is perfect in all His ways. And when His glory is shown, then there's definitely something different that's going on. And I got to believe that no matter if somebody is an atheist or agnostic or somebody who just is wandering this world, that there's something inside of them that's looking for something different and something that's distinguished. Because everything else in this life will not give them the peace that God has created us to have. And people can laugh about it or say that they've got it or they don't really need God and God has a crutch. But I'm telling you that because God has changed me so much that I believe with all my heart that His glory being in our lives is the greatest thing we could ever have. God, show me your glory. God, don't let it be about me. Let no man or woman get credit for what you're doing in this place. Let no man or woman get credit for when you send us out to go do things. God, may you get the glory for what's going to happen. And when that happens, then we see miracles. Then we see God's favor. Then we see beautiful things happen. And it becomes wonderful and marvelous and glorious because it's about him. Because he has been so selfless. Isn't that kind of crazy? We have to give glory to God, but he's been selfless because he died for us. So that's why he gets glory. Because everything about him has been selfless in that sense. God, show me your glory. See, that's the problem I think it's been with the church in America. Maybe we can't speak for the whole world. But sometimes it's all been about people and it hasn't been about God. And that's why it feels like it's dead and it's dying. It's not about a church becoming 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000. It's about a church having people who are being sold out for God. And that his glory is shown all over this world. God, show us your glory. God, I know on TV we see everything that's opposite of you, but show us your glory. On the internet we're seeing a country dividing. It's right in front of our face. But God, you are not divided. Show us your glory. That's why we come and worship together. That's why we come to be inspired by his word and pray with one another and encourage one another. And I'm telling you, that's what a dying world is really looking for. That's what a dying generation is really looking for. Even though they think they want something else, really, we were built and created to show God's glory. All right, let's move on. And the Lord said, I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you, and I will proclaim my name, the Lord, in your presence. Don't you love what God tells Moses that? I will pass all my goodness in front of you. Wouldn't that be a really cool thing to hear from God? I'm going to pass all my goodness in front of you. I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy. I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. But, he said, you cannot see my face, for no one may see me and live. And the Lord said, there is a place near me where you may stand on a rock. When my glory passes by, see, this was what Moses was saying, show me your glory, show me everything that's good about you, right? So my glory passes by, I will put you in the cleft of the rock and cover you with my hand until I've passed by. And I will remove my hand, and you will see my back. My face must not be seen. And so I want to leave you with this idea, that when God's presence shows, in our presence, compassion and mercy are present. How do we know that God's present? How do we know that he's in this place? How do we know that he's everywhere? Is when we see compassion and mercy, then we see that he is right there in the moment. Now, we got to be students of the Bible, okay? So I got to share this with you. Because we can't get stuck on this idea that this is just limited to the Old Testament. And that this idea that God had to hide Moses in the cleft of the rock and put his hand over him while he's passing by so he would just see his back. Because, there was just so much of God to be exposed. As a matter of fact, in the scripture we find out too that even though God hid Moses from that Moses was radiating God when he came down from the mountain, and that it was just so much of God that I think we would explode when we would see how much good he is all about. But that's Old Testament thinking. You see, we live in the New Testament world. See, what happened was 2,000 years ago, God himself wrapped himself in human flesh and walked this land. Now we could talk to him face to face. In Christmas, we're going to have the Advent, and we talk about God being Emmanuel, God with us. He's with us in this moment. And then he died on a cross and bled for us and covered our sins, took away our sins because he died on a cross. And then he rose 3 days later, but you got to know something that happened when he died, because this is super important. Because in the temple in Jerusalem, there was this huge curtain that was dividing mankind from the Holy of Holies. The glory of God, all the goodness of God. And when Jesus died and he breathed his last breath, the scripture says that that curtain was torn in half. And because that curtain was torn in half, there was nothing now that separated us from God. I want you to know, as a Christian, as a person of God, as somebody who believes in Jesus, you don't have to be head into a cleft of a rock. That you can experience all of God's glory for who he is and who he is. And you don't have to be just a person who gets to stand in a whole community of people at a tent and watch a leader over there on the outside of the camp experiencing more of the glory of God and more of an intimacy with God because the pillar of cloud is over his tent. But every single one of you have your own tent. Every single one of you have your own entrance to where God's glory will come and visit you. And God's presence will be right there with you. And you can believe the promise that he will never leave you nor forsake you. It doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter what color skin you have. It doesn't matter what gender you are. It doesn't matter what job you have. It doesn't matter what nation you're from. That if you believe Jesus, his ever-presence is inside of you. Don't be fooled to think that your prayers don't get past the ceiling. When you pray to a God who's living in you. You're not being God, but God is present right here. And the more that you get rid of yourself, and the more that you take away all your wants and your desires, and you become undone, and you just sit there, God begins to fill you up, and he begins to put his love and his compassion in you. And I'm saying, if you don't have any love and compassion, if you think you can live a life and say that you're with God and you have no love and compassion, I'm telling you, you missed it. You missed it, and you need a face-to-face talk with God. If there's a human being on this earth that you can't have any love and compassion, I love what God says. And you got to understand I think we have to understand what he's saying when he says this. He says, I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion, and I'll have mercy on whom I will have mercy. That does not mean that there's a select few. You know what I believe that means? I believe that means that he will still have compassion and mercy for people who we don't think deserve it. And who are we to question God to give somebody love and compassion when we don't think they deserve it? Because God is God and he is sovereign, and he will have love for who he wants to have love for, and he will have compassion for who he wants to have compassion. And even though people have marginalized you, they have counted you out, and they say you don't deserve it, God says, I don't care what they say, I will have compassion and mercy for you. That's the God we serve. Isn't that beautiful? God is not excluding people. God is including people. Who are we to question him and who he loves and who he died for? Let's just be honest that we should be grateful, since it is Thanksgiving, that he died for us personally. I want to have that mindset that he has. I want to be changed to his ways. That we can walk through and we begin to love people who seemed unlovable. We have mercy for people who don't deserve mercy. And people say, why are you giving them love? Why are you giving them mercy? It's because God gave it to me. God put it in my life. I don't care if you question me. I'm going to do it anyways. So, Chuck, will you come up and you'll play that, just in the background, some chords, play that song, Here in Your Presence. And we're going to do prayer time a little bit differently, okay? Let's just go ahead and stand. And we'll have prayer for anybody who needs healing or whatever, but I want us to do something differently. Normally what I would say is this. I would say, if anybody feels like they don't have God in their life right now, or they're having a tough time, do you need prayer? But I don't want to do it. I want to switch it a little bit. I want you to bow your heads and close your eyes. And I want you to imagine that we are that big camp called Israel. And if you feel comfortable enough to be like Moses, to where you could go to that outer tent, and that when you go into that tent, his presence hovers over it, that you have a relationship with God, that you feel his ever-presence, that you know he's omnipresent and he's right here with you. And that it doesn't take the fact that you are a big leader or that you are the boss, or that just the fact that you and you and God have a face-to-face talk. If you feel comfortable with admitting to that and to God showing His glory in your life, will you raise your hand?